fuel servicing of aircraft. So in this objective, this module, what we're going to do is we're going to talk about the different types of fuel used in aircraft. We're going to describe some contaminants and how to control that contaminant in the aircraft. We'll look at some hazards associated with servicing fuel, and we're going to explain some procedures and some safety precautions to observe when servicing aircraft fuel. Again, as with all the servicing we talk about, realize these are just some very generic steps we're going to go through, and before you actually service your aircraft, I want you to physically get the manual out and look at it step by step so you don't cause any additional work or any damage to your aircraft. We want to be able to identify our fuel. Fuel is going to fall into two major categories. One, we're going to have an avgas or an aviation gasoline. The other one, we're going to have a turbine fuel. Just as there's different types of aviation gasoline, there's going to be some different types of turbine fuel as well. The avgas is going to be identified by a color code. You could have a red or a blue or a green or a purple fuel. Most common, I think we're going to find today, is going to be the blue fuel. It's going to be 100 low lead. One of the things the textbook really doesn't cover too much when servicing fuel is you could find somebody could have a supplemental type certificate and it's just burning regular 90 plus octane car gas in their aircraft. What happens when you mix the car gas with the aviation fuel? What happens to that color blue fuel? They turn clear. So you'll know it's been contaminated with something other than 100 low lead fuel. Turbine fuels, on the other hand, are going to be yellow, going to be a straw color, and you should never ever have a reason to mix turbine and avgas together. In fact, if you look at the caps on your airplane, you're going to find out that the cap on the aviation gasoline is actually smaller than the cap on the turbine fuel, and we'll talk about that in a few minutes. Why did we do that? Why is the avgas cap smaller than the turbine cap? Contamination control. Contamination in aviation fuel is anything in the fuel that does not belong there. A bug, water, dirt, sand, anything that's not supposed to be in that fuel that's there. What's the most common contamination in fuel? Somebody putting the wrong fuel in the airplane, putting avgas in a turbine fuel system or putting turbine fuel in an avgas system. We've gone through great measures to keep that from happening, but you know, it still happens. We still get the wrong fuel. Make sure when that truck rolls up to your airplane and you're looking, make sure that that's got the right fuel. Make sure that has the fuel that your aircraft is supposed to have, and make sure it's the fuel that you asked for. The best method to prevent the introduction of FAD into your fuel or contamination into your fuel is to keep it dry. Okay, keep the fuel dry. Don't let moisture get in it. Use the proper filters. Make sure we're filtering the fuel from the time it gets out of the truck to the time it gets to the airplane. Use screens, use separators, things of this nature. Other fueling concerns we should pay attention to: static electricity. You've got a lot of fuel flowing through that rubber hose. We have a chance of building up static electricity, so make sure your truck is grounded. Make sure your aircraft is grounded. Watch where the fuel vapors are going. Make sure that you're not sitting there breathing those vapors. You don't need to be breathing those fuel vapors. They're not good for you. What are your precautions? What happens if we have a fuel spill? What's our next step? And what happens if we spill fuel on our clothing? Are you going to walk over to the smoking pit and go ahead and have a smoke a lucky when you're done fueling after you get fuel all over yourself? Things you need to think about. Types of contamination, the most common, I already said, was misfueling, putting the wrong fuel in your airplane, putting a jet fuel in a reciprocating engine. Avgas and turbine engines, not so bad. You're going to get a lead deposit on your blades, but you know what? That engine's still going to run fine. We don't have to worry about it falling out of the sky. Go the other direction and you put turbine engine in a reciprocating aircraft engine, it will not atomize, and you're going to end up stalling an engine, probably at the worst opportune time. Review the differences. Look at the, do a fuel sump check. Make sure you don't have water. Make sure you're not getting microbe growth and stuff like that in your fuel cell. Do your drains as you're supposed to. If you have a weekly check where you're supposed to be checking for moisture in your fuel or contamination in your fuel, do that. look at the ebook, look at the book that's associated with this. It's going to talk about some different types of contamination, how to identify them, what to look for, things of that nature. The procedures for fueling. If you're working on large turbine aircraft, typically you're going to have what we call a SPR, or a single point refueling receptacle. You'll hook that up and then you'll start fueling the aircraft. It reduces the chance of contamination. It's a whole lot faster. We need to be cautious when we're servicing these. We want to make sure the guy driving the truck doesn't provide too much pressure. If the pressure on the truck is too high, you could start damaging valves and stuff like that on your airplane. The other thing we want to do is, if there's a procedure, if there's a specific way you put so much fuel in the front tank before you start servicing the wings, you want to keep the wings even. You don't want to get an unbalanced aircraft, or worse than that, you don't want to fill the aft tanks up first and set the aircraft on its tail. Saw that happen before. Nothing good comes out of that one. Defueling, the opposite of refueling. What goes in must come out. If we're not going to run those engines, but we're getting ready to do a heavy check on that airplane, we may need to take the fuel out of that airplane. Defueling can be done two ways. One, we can do it with that same single point that we just refueled with, or on a smaller aircraft, maybe you're going to drain it out of cavity drains. Either way, let gravity do the work or let the truck draw it out. To do a final defuel, though, you're still going to have to drain those cavity drains. Always follow the safety precautions when defueling. Make sure that the truck you're putting the fuel in is designed for the fuel you're putting it in. Make sure that if you're going to defuel an aircraft that has turbine fuel in it, that it's going into a truck that's designed for turbine fuel. Use caution during the defueling process, just as you did in a refuel. Make sure you don't empty that front tank first. Again, follow the checklist. Make sure there's probably going to be a procedure to tell you which tanks you defuel and in what order you defuel them in. So we've looked at refueling, we've looked at some of the precautions, we've looked at the contaminations, we've talked about stuff like that. Always follow the manufacturer's guidelines for refueling and defueling aircraft. Always make sure that you're using the fuel that is designated for that aircraft, the correct octane level, or the correct type of fuel. It is an avgas. If there's an STC, are you allowed to use regular automotive gas in that, or are we using jet fuel? Don't intermix the gases. Now, I told you back a while ago, I tell you, why are the cap sizes different? Why is an avgas cap smaller than a turbine cap? Because I can't take that turbine hose and put it in my avgas tank. But I can take that avgas hose and still put it in my turbine gas tank. Remember, an over-the-wing hose for avgas is going to be smaller. I could inadvertently service my turbine engine with avgas, but that airplane would still fly. But if I inadvertently put turbine fuel in that reciprocating engine, we're gonna have problems.